"You are going to have sex with us," said the 3 giant Zulu women who lived on the lodge he bought. The wind had teeth that morning. It bit through wool and skin alike, finding the cracks around his collar and the seams of his gloves. The man trudged uphill through knee-deep snow, a shape against the white vastness. Tall, broad-shouldered, wrapped in a flannel coat that had long since lost its color to years of ash and frost. Behind him, his horse pulled a small sled stacked with supplies: flour, salt, coffee, kerosene. He'd bought the lodge with what little he had left, a forgotten place of timber and stone, standing alone between the forest and the frozen lake. It was supposed to be his new beginning, quiet and unclaimed. When the roofline came into view, he stopped. The chimney breathed. A thin grey ribbon of smoke rose into the white sky. He frowned, not believing it at first, then set his jaw and started forward again. His boots crunched over the crusted snow. The axe handle on the sled shifted, knocking softly against a tin pot. The air smelled of birch ash and distant bread. The lodge door stood half open. Warm air and the scent of pine sap drifted out. He stepped inside, breath caught halfway between surprise and warning. 3 women stood near the hearth. Their clothes were rough and travel-worn. Wool skirts, coats of patched fur, boots caked with mud turned to ice. One turned, meeting his stare with the steady calm of someone who had already decided what was hers. "You're late," she said quietly. Her voice carried an accent he couldn't place. "We've been waiting." He blinked. Waiting? His tone was low, more disbelief than question. The second woman, taller than the first, leaned her shoulder against the wall. "You bought this place. We kept it alive." He let his pack slide to the floor. Snow fell from his sleeves. "You're living here." The third woman stirred the fire with an iron poker. Sparks climbed up, lighting the planes of her face. "We are now," she said. He looked around. The table scrubbed clean, the cot remade with fresh sheets. His own lanterns hung from the rafters. Everything smelled of soap and smoke and something floral he couldn't name. It didn't look abandoned. It looked occupied. He removed his gloves slowly, aware of their eyes. "This lodge was empty last winter. I paid for it." The first woman tilted her head. "Money doesn't mean much here. The snow takes what it wants. So do we." He wanted to argue, to claim his right, but something in their stillness unsettled him. They moved like people who had learned the rhythm of survival together. No wasted motion, no need for words. He felt suddenly like an intruder, though it was his name on the papers folded in his coat pocket. He set his gear by the door. "I'll stay one night," he said finally. "Then we'll settle who owns what." The taller one smiled faintly. "Stay as long as you can." He didn't answer. The fire cracked. Wind rattled the shutters. He busied himself with the stove, pretending not to watch them. They moved about the lodge with quiet certainty, preparing food, checking the latch on the windows, stacking wood. The sound of their boots against the planks was strangely rhythmic, almost ceremonial. When night came, the storm pressed against the walls. He sat near the fire, his coat still damp. The women shared the bench across from him. They spoke in low voices he couldn't follow, the syllables soft and rolling. He caught fragments of laughter, glances exchanged like sparks. "You came here alone," the first woman said suddenly. Her gaze was steady. "Why?" He hesitated, feeling the heat of the fire and the weight of their attention. "Work. Quiet. I needed a place that didn't remember me." The third woman's eyes softened. "Then the snow brought you to the right house." He tried to smile, but it didn't hold. Outside, the storm grew louder, swallowing the night. Inside, the air thickened with warmth and wood smoke. The 3 women sat like sentinels, each different but bound by the same gravity that filled the room. He felt something tilt inside him, a slow shift, like ice cracking on the lake. Later, as he unrolled his bedroll near the stove, he noticed they hadn't prepared separate sleeping places. Their coats hung by the door, their boots lined together near the hearth. The taller one blew out the lamp, leaving only firelight. "Don't worry," she said softly, almost kind. "The lodge keeps its own order." He lay awake long after the flames had sunk to coals, watching their silhouettes move in the red half-light. The wind roared over the roof, but the lodge held fast, steady as breath. He thought of the long road behind him, the silence he had come to claim, and realized it no longer belonged to him. By dawn, the storm had passed. He stepped outside to feed the horse and found the sled half empty. Some of the sacks gone, a coil of rope missing. When he turned, the first woman stood in the doorway, arms folded, watching. "You'll fetch more supplies," she said simply. "The snow will return by evening." He nodded, not sure why he obeyed. The forest waited, quiet, indifferent. Behind him, the lodge smoked again, alive and warm. As he walked down toward the frozen road, he felt their eyes on his back, and the strange certainty that whatever he'd come here to own, it was already owning him. He didn't look back until the tree line broke, and by then the smoke was gone, swallowed by the pale morning sky. When he returned at dusk, the light was blue and heavy. The sled groaned under the weight of the new sacks. The road had iced over again, the air thick with that deep stillness that comes after snow. The lodge lights burned in the windows, steady, yellow, like eyes watching through frost. He paused before the door, his breath rising in clouds. Inside, the air was warm and fragrant, bread baked somewhere unseen. The fire burned strong. The three women sat close to the hearth, their faces lit from below, shadows bending across the walls. They looked up when he entered, as though he'd been gone longer than a day. "You found flour," the tallest said. He nodded, setting the bags down. "And salt." The first woman stood and brushed the flour dust from his coat sleeves as though he were one of their own. Her hands were cold, steady. "You'll eat with us," she said. He wanted to resist, some stubborn pride still left. But hunger was louder. He sat at the table. Steam rose from a pot of stew. The smell of venison filled the room. They served him first, then themselves, moving with that same quiet rhythm. For a while, there was only the sound of spoons against tin bowls and the crack of wood in the fire. After supper, the women cleared the table without speaking. He went to check his sled outside, but when he reached the door, the first woman spoke. "Stay," she said. "The wolves are close tonight." He froze with his hand on the latch. "I've lived through worse." "Not here," the tall one said. "This land has its own ways. You're still a stranger." He turned, meeting her eyes. "Maybe I like being one," she smiled slightly. "That will pass." He said nothing. When the wind lifted, it carried the faint cry of something distant, a howl, long and low. He closed the door. By the fire they sat again. The room was dim now, the oil lamp trimmed low. The third woman reached for his hand without hesitation, tracing the calluses on his palm. "You cut trees," she said. "I do." Her thumb brushed a scar near his wrist. "You've been hurt by them." He thought of the logging river, the frozen logs rolling, the man who'd fallen beneath them years ago. "Everyone who cuts long enough gets hurt." "Then you understand us," she said quietly. He wanted to ask what she meant, but she'd already turned back to the flames. The other two watched in silence. Something unspoken moved through the room, heavy as the storm pressing against the walls. That night, he lay again by the stove, but sleep would not come. Their breathing was steady behind him, a soft, shared rhythm. The smell of pine, smoke, and their hair filled the space. He thought of the papers in his coat pocket, the deed, the proof, and how small they seemed now. He rose before dawn, stepping outside into the bitter cold. The snow had stopped. The lake lay still and white. Across its surface, the faint line of footprints stretched toward the pines. 3 sets, side by side, leading out and vanishing where the forest thickened. By the time he came back inside, they were already awake, standing near the hearth. The tallest held his axe. She handed it to him handle first. "If you're to stay," she said, "the woodpile needs building." He nodded once. The weight of the axe felt familiar, grounding. He stepped out again and split logs until his shoulders ached, the rhythm steady and cold. When he paused, he saw them watching from the doorway. 3 figures against the glow of the firelight, their faces unreadable. By evening, the woodpile reached his chest. His palms were raw, his breath white in the twilight. He felt hollowed, but the emptiness was clean. Inside, they had prepared supper again. He noticed small changes. The walls scrubbed, a new rug spread near the stove, the windows sealed tight against the wind. Their presence filled every inch. The first woman poured him coffee. "You work well," she said. He took the cup, nodding. "Work keeps me quiet." The third woman's eyes flicked to the scars on his hands. "Quiet isn't peace." He looked at her, but she turned away. That night, the storm returned. It howled against the lodge, testing the shutters, the roof, the door. The women gathered by the hearth, their voices weaving low through the roar of the wind. He sat nearby, sharpening the axe. Each strike of the stone echoed like a heartbeat. When the fire dimmed, the tall woman stood. "You keep watch tonight," she said softly. "If the wind breaks the chimney, we lose the fire." He nodded, though he didn't know why he obeyed. She touched his shoulder in passing, light as breath. "Don't let it go out." He stayed by the hearth until dawn, feeding the flames one log at a time. Outside, the snow swallowed the world again. When the first grey light crept through the window, he realized something had changed. His coat still hung by the door, his sled still outside. But the lodge no longer felt borrowed. It felt like something shared, neither his nor theirs alone. He stood, listening to the quiet. The three women slept on the cot, tangled in blankets, their faces soft and still. He watched them for a long moment, then turned back to the fire. The storm had taken the rest of the world. All that remained was this room, this warmth, this uneasy peace. He whispered, more to himself than to them. "Maybe I'll stay." From the cot, the first woman stirred. "You already have." ChatGPT said, when morning settled, the air had that clear, cutting silence that comes only after deep snow. The lodge seemed to breathe with him now, its timbers popping softly in the thaw. The smell of smoke folded into the grain of the walls. He went outside to split more wood, to see if his horse still lived. It did, half buried in drifts, snorting steam, stamping. He brushed the ice from its mane and whispered to calm it. The sound of the axe carried through the cold, each swing biting into the log like a heartbeat. By mid-morning, they came out one by one. Wrapped in wool shawls, their faces shadowed by the weak sun, they moved with the ease of people who had learned to live in silence. They worked beside him, lifting logs, stacking, binding with rope. He tried not to look too long at any of them, though each time he raised his eyes, one was already watching. The tall one spoke first. "You work like a man trying to forget something." He kept his rhythm. "Maybe I am. Does it work?" He set the axe into the stump. "Sometimes it almost does." She smiled, but there was no softness in it. "Then don't stop." By noon, they'd built a wall of wood against the side of the lodge. He wiped his hands and looked toward the frozen lake. The world beyond seemed endless and unkind. The women stood together, quiet, as if listening to something far off, a sound he couldn't hear. Inside, the air was warmer than it had been before. They'd hung herbs to dry above the stove. The smell of pine and rosemary filled the small space. He sat at the table. The first woman poured tea. "You've made yourself part of the house now," she said. He looked up. "You mean your house?" She met his gaze. "Ours," he didn't answer. The word hung there between them, heavy and certain. He drank his tea, the taste bitter and clean. Later, when dusk came, the third woman opened the door to let in the cold. The wind circled through the room, rattling the dishes, touching his face. She looked out across the white field and said, "Storms come early this year. The forest doesn't trust easy men." He rose and went to stand beside her. "Then I'll learn to be hard again." She looked at him then, her eyes darker in the fading light. "It's not hardness the forest asks for. It's surrender." That night the wind rose once more, but softer, as though the storm was circling without anger. He slept on the cot this time, no longer at the stove. The first woman tended the fire, feeding it small sticks. The second mended a torn coat. The third hummed some old tune that had no words. Before sleep, he said quietly, "I came here for quiet." "You've given me something else." The tall one looked up. "You came here to be alone. We only showed you what that really means." He turned his face toward the wall. The sound of the wind outside was like breathing, slow, deep, endless. Days passed like that, each one blurring into the next. Work, fire, silence, shared glances. The horse grew thin but strong. The women walked to the lake at dawn, always together, leaving no tracks that lasted. He began to feel the rhythm of them, their quiet speech, the way they moved through the house like a single thought with three voices. One evening, when he returned from cutting wood near the ridge, the lodge was empty. The fire was low, and snow had drifted through a crack in the shutters. On the table lay three things: his coat, brushed and mended, his axe, polished to silver, and the deed papers, folded neatly beneath a stone. He sat down, listening to the wind move around the walls. A thin line of smoke rose from the chimney, faint and uncertain. The silence pressed close, heavier than before. Then, from outside, came a sound, a soft, distant calling, low and steady. It came from the lake, from the dark line of trees beyond. He stood, went to the door, opened it. The night met him like cold breath. They were there. 3 figures standing at the edge of the frozen water, their shawls dark against the snow. They did not wave or speak. They simply stood, facing the wind, as if waiting for something neither of them could name. He stepped into the snow, boots sinking deep. The cold found every seam of his coat, but he didn't stop. When he reached them, none turned to greet him. They only watched the horizon where the sky and the ice met, one endless sheet of grey. The first woman said softly, "You built your fire. You kept it alive. Now you stay if you wish." He looked at them, the world silent around them. "And if I don't?" The tall one's breath made a pale ghost in the air. "Then the lodge will remember you. It remembers all who surrender to it." He turned his eyes toward the dark woods, then back to the lodge in the distance, the thin smoke rising straight and calm. He could see the glow of the fire through the window, steady and sure. He took a step back toward it, then another. None followed. They remained by the lake, 3 still figures in the pale light. Inside again, the heat felt like something earned. He hung his coat, set his axe by the door, and stirred the embers until they brightened. Their cups still sat on the table, half full, steam gone. He spoke aloud, to the room, to the silence that now seemed alive. "I'll keep the fire. I'll wait." Outside, the wind rose once more, circling the lodge like a breath drawn slow and deep. He did not know whether they would return, or whether they had ever truly left. The first light of dawn crept through the shutters, thin and grey. He woke to the sound of ice cracking out on the lake, a long, low groan that rolled through the timber walls. For a moment, he thought he'd dreamed everything: the women, the storm, the silence that carried voices. But the lodge held their traces. 3 shawls still hung near the door. 3 bowls sat clean by the basin. Their smell, faint and floral, lingered in the air like a memory that refused to fade. He moved through the rooms quietly, feeling the boards under his feet. Every creak sounded alive. The hearth still held a pocket of warmth beneath the ashes. He knelt, stirred it, added kindling. The flame came easily, as if waiting for him. He worked through the morning, split wood, fed the horse, checked the traps by the ridge. The air was so clear he could see miles across the frozen lake, but there was no sign of them. Only snow and sky, the faint shimmer of frost on birch trunks. When he came back to the lodge, he spoke to it out of habit, telling it what he'd done, what he'd seen, as if they still listened from somewhere unseen. That night, he cooked enough stew for 4. He placed 3 bowls by the fire, poured coffee into 3 tin cups. The ritual steadied him. He ate his share, left the rest untouched. Before sleep, he whispered, "The fire's still burning." Winter deepened. Weeks passed in the same slow rhythm. The snow climbed the windows. The forest grew silent. He chopped wood, mended roofs, fished through holes in the ice. The work filled his hands, but not his mind. Each evening, he waited for a sound, a step outside, a knock, a breath against the door. None came. Then, one morning, he woke to footprints. 3 sets, pressed deep into the fresh snow, leading from the trees to the lake. His pulse quickened. The prints were recent, still sharp. He followed them to the water's edge, where the ice had cracked open in a dark oval. Beside it lay a shawl, soaked and frozen stiff. He picked it up, felt the weight of it, familiar, undeniable. He called out once, twice. His voice scattered across the frozen expanse, returned as a hollow echo. The lake offered no answer. He stood there a long time, the cold creeping through his boots. Then he turned back toward the lodge. The wind had risen again, filling the tracks behind him. By the time he reached the steps, they were gone. That night, he dreamed. He saw the lodge from above, its roof glowing against the dark forest. Inside, 3 figures moved through the firelight, silent, certain. When he woke, the smell of smoke and rosemary was stronger than ever. He rose, heart pounding, and found the hearth burning bright. 3 chairs had been drawn close, as if for company. He didn't speak. He only sat, staring into the flames until dawn. The days that followed blurred into one another. The forest thawed in small ways. The river cracked open. The snow softened. Ravens returned. He began to talk to the lodge as if it were alive. "I'll keep the fire," he'd say each morning. "I'll wait." And at night, when the wind pressed against the windows, he would hear, faintly, the sound of footsteps on the porch. When spring finally came, the lake broke apart, ice drifting like torn paper. He built a small raft from fallen logs, not to leave, but to watch from the middle of the water. From there, He could see the whole world of his exile. The forest, the ridge, the thin column of smoke curling from the lodge chimney. It looked peaceful. He returned before dark. The door stood open. Inside, the air was warm, alive again. The table was set for 4. His cup stood where he always left it. 3 others waited, empty but expectant. He took his place. "You kept the fire," he said softly, though he could not see them. From somewhere near the hearth, a whisper rose, so quiet it might have been the shift of air. "We said the lodge keeps its own order." He closed his eyes. The sound of the fire filled the room, steady and low. Outside, the last snow fell, soft, forgiving, covering everything that had been. He did not rise when the night came. He only listened, breathing in rhythm with the walls, the fire, the wind. The lodge no longer felt empty. It felt awake. In the stillness, he spoke one last time. "I'm not a stranger anymore." And somewhere in the silence, faint but certain, came a reply. "No. You belong to the lodge now." When the thaw reached the ridge and the first green showed under the birch, the world shifted from silence to dripping sound. Snow melted from the eaves of the lodge in clear beads. The smell of wet earth pushed through the wood smoke. He woke to that, to the soft ticking of meltwater on the window ledge, and for a while he lay still. Not sure if the warmth in the room came from the fire, or from what remained of their nearness. He rose, built the morning fire, boiled coffee, and carried the mug outside. The lake had opened in patches. A mist hung low, catching the new light. The air was full of small noises again. Water, wings, the crack of ice giving way. He stood at the edge of it all and listened. Somewhere across the water came a faint call, a voice or a bird. He couldn't tell which. It carried a note he recognized. Not a summons, but a kind of permission. He answered with silence, a long breath, the steam of it rising to meet the pale sun. Work filled the days. He cleaned the tools, mended the roof, planted a small line of spruce saplings behind the lodge. Each evening, he set out 4 bowls, 4 cups. He ate what he needed, left the rest. The habit steadied him more than any prayer. On the 7th day of the thaw, he found the shawl he had buried in the snow months before. It had thawed clean, the fabric still whole, the scent of smoke and pine still faint on it. He hung it by the door beside his coat. For a moment, the air in the room changed, warmer, as if a breath had moved through. He spoke aloud, voice low. "If you return, there's work to do." "The lake will take the raft if we don't bind it," the fire answered with a pop. Outside, the wind carried a whisper through the birches. It was enough. Days stretched into weeks. The forest deepened in colour. The path to the ridge cleared. He began to trap again, to set lines, to live as if the world might welcome him back. And yet, every evening, when the sun fell behind the ridge, he found himself at the lake's edge, watching the water shift under the red light. He would stay there until the stars came, waiting for the faint ripple of a shadow or the sound of feet on wet ground. One night, late in that first spring, a storm rose suddenly. Warm rain. Heavy, the sky breaking open. He ran for shelter, but when he reached the lodge door, he stopped. Inside, the fire burned high. 3 sets of wet footprints marked the floor, leading from the threshold to the hearth. He followed them with his eyes until they vanished at the center of the room. He stood there, soaked, heart beating hard. The air shimmered with heat and rain. He spoke into it without fear. "You've come back." The voice that answered was close, almost beside his ear. "We never left." He turned, but saw only the red light of the fire on the walls. The sound of the rain filled everything. The roof, the windows, his pulse. He moved to the hearth, laid more wood on the flame, sat down on the floor. The lodge breathed around him, timbers expanding with the wet, settling again. The smell of the forest came through the open door. Wet pine, moss, earth. He closed his eyes. The warmth against his back felt like hands. He stayed that way until morning. When he opened his eyes, the footprints were gone, but the floor gleamed clean, the air still holding their scent. Outside, the storm had washed the world to silver. From that day, he no longer marked time. Seasons folded into one another. Travelers sometimes saw smoke rising from the lake in winter, and sometimes at dusk, the faint outline of a man chopping wood beside a lodge that no map named. They said the place was lived in, but never owned. They said it kept its own order, and if anyone lingered long enough, they might swear they heard voices carried through the trees. 3, low and even, speaking to someone unseen. He would have smiled at that, If he'd heard, inside the lodge, the fire never died. The table was always set for 4, and when the wind came down from the ridge, it moved through the rafters like the sound of steady breath, of those who endure, of those who stay. The man listened to it each night, eyes half closed, a hand resting on the wood beside him. The lodge listened back, and between them, the world went on. If you enjoyed, please subscribe and comment what country you're watching from. See you in the next one.